Since arriving on the scene a few years ago, GLP-1s have reshaped the world, including the structure and mission of Weight Watchers. At one point in time not too long ago, Weight Watchers was the legacy name in weight loss treatment. You're probably like me and know plenty of friends, relatives, or coworkers who've counted points or received health coaching through the company. Armed with an endorsement from board member Oprah Winfrey, everything was turning up Weight Watchers, until it wasn't. Just a few years after slimming down to WW as part of a corporate rebrand, the company experienced a sea change and took on water as GLP-1s flooded the market. Usurped by powerful weight loss drugs manufactured by Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk, along with ascendant telehealth firms like Ro, Hims & Hers, and Noom, Weight Watchers went into significant decline. Ultimately, even Oprah left the company and donated her shares. In May of 2025, Weight Watchers filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in order to eliminate around $1.5 billion in debt. It emerged from bankruptcy in July and now has its sights set on repositioning itself as a key player in the GLP-1 age. But what is Weight Watchers' function in 2026? Is Weight Watchers still the household name in weight loss, or an example of a bygone approach to treating obesity? Can Weight Watchers, as its recent ad campaign blitz would suggest, be more akin to the telehealth firms that dethroned it in the early 2020s? To answer those questions, I'm joined by Scott Honkin, Chief Commercial Officer at Weight Watchers. In this week's episode, Scott provides an update on the company's current standing in the GLP-1 landscape, where it's been, and where it's going. And in lieu of our trend segment, we have some audio takeouts from my time at South by Southwest. This includes leaders from Amgen, Marina Mahar Communications, and Compass Pathways. Scott, it's great to have you on the show. You know, I always joke that we kind of have three main pillars, and it's like anything that's going on at the FDA, anything that has to do with AI, and then obviously the GLP-1 revolution and every facet of that. So I want to pick your brain about the third part, but let's start kind of more meta about Weight Watchers, and we can talk the broader GLP-1 conversation. Talk to me about where the company stands. You know, you guys obviously went through the strategic reorg last year. I was actually asking my podcast producer Fitz before we started the conversation, like, I know that there had been the rebrand to WW. Now is it Weight Watchers? Like, how should we refer to you as an organization?
Sure. It is Weight Watchers, and it's been a exciting past 12 to 18 months for sure. We're we've rebranded the company just from a look, feel, et cetera perspective. Have some new names to the programs that we've launched recently with our Core Plus, and Med Plus offerings. And really, running forward on all cylinders. GLP-1s have definitely reframed the conversation in a lot of ways and have caused us to kind of adapt and evolve the company over the past bit of time. Drawing on over 60 years of legacy in the space and kind of a science-backed authoritative leader, we're super excited. And, the company, probably looks a lot different today than it maybe did 2 years ago, and definitely, than it did 50 years ago. A bunch of great people on the team, and, really excited about the opportunity going forward.
No, and I want to unpack that too, because, I've had plenty of family members, friends who have counted points and everything. Like it goes way back with Weight Watchers and stuff. But to your point there, so much has changed with Weight Watchers too, with the advent and adoption of GLP-1s. What do you make of where the company stands right now? I mean, there's obviously so many pharma companies that are eyeing that space, in addition to Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk, who have the two that are on the market. But then there's also other telehealth firms that are trying to compete. I think about Hims & Hers, Ro, Noom, all that sort of stuff. So like, what do you make of Weight Watchers standing currently? Like, how do you assess where you are in the marketplace and how you're interacting with consumers?
Yeah, for sure. And, definitely no shortage of attention recently, for sure, whether it's pharma or other, players, et cetera. I think, we're excited. We have a unique position, I think. And so, one of the areas that, we're super excited about is, we have that flexibility to support members, whether we're the prescriber of record, I guess, if you will. And so our Med Plus offering is our kind of go forward name for that product, which used to be called Weight Watchers Clinic. That's comes out of an acquisition we made a couple years ago of the Sequence product we've now rolled in, and so have a lot of great traction there on that product, and that's where we can bring that virtual clinic and surround sound support to the member. But then we also have our GLP-1 Success offering, and so that's embedded within the Med Plus product. But that's also a solution we can leverage for people that maybe use their primary care provider, right? And so, rough stats today, 70 to 80% of people still get their GLP-1 prescriptions from a primary care provider or something that isn't telehealth, right? And so telehealth gets a lot of the airtime, et cetera. But, if you are only doing telehealth, you're potentially missing 70+% of the market. And so, we're excited. We've got that program that's embedded within our Med Plus offering when we are the prescriber of providing that virtual clinic service. But also for all those members that are engaging with their primary care provider or another prescriber, we can support them too. And so, that all draws upon, that, rich heritage, of 60 years of nutrition and, science and kind of the points element still being a program, but we're very much more digital forward with, a redefined app and virtual workshops and kind of a tech forward approach that's complemented by the in-person workshops and community that's still a part of the program. But we've, definitely evolved that over the past couple of years for sure.
And I want to ask you about the rebranding aspect too, because again, I think if we had this, I think about when I went to Health a few years ago and I interviewed one of your colleagues for the podcast, and there had been all this excitement. I think that Weight Watchers had just had their partnership with Sesame announced, and that was going into the start of 2023. But that was also just kind of at the tip of the iceberg that we had for GLP-1s. And obviously so much has happened since then. And I remember a big part of our conversation was around Weight Watchers having this really defined institutional name when it comes to obesity and treating weight and everything like that. And since then, we've seen, again, to your point, so many other players come into the space. I understand the need to go into a rebrand, and I was talking to some creatives about it, and some of them were really, enthralled by what you had done. I see it on the subway all the time, like the different look and feel and the colors and stuff. There was one that I talked to, and he had said, there's part of it where it's like, is this too little, too late? Like, basically the question I had is like, how do you take that where it's like, yeah, an institution that's been around for 60 years with this newfangled thing that's come around the past three to four that you have entrenched players in there? Like, how did the rebrand from your perspective kind of meet that intersection?
Yeah. And so I think it's kind of drawing on the legacy. And so the name, depending on the market, we're in the US and also in international markets as well, typically 80 to 90+% name recognition, right? And so it's, driving that name recognition, especially you think about some newer players to market. Anybody that's in the space maybe knows all those names, but it takes a lot of work to get household, name recognition if you're just entering the space. And so I think that's how we decided, staying with Weight Watchers as a name was the right approach, just because of that strong name recognition. But then from there, how do we modernize the brand a little bit more and drive in all these new things we're doing? So some bolder colors, bolder lettering, tying it to kind of the the digital forward approach, and that's a lot of what we've been trying to do. So whether it's showing up in subways, billboards. I'm based out of Chicago, and I drive to O'Hare Airport, and like a run of 3 billboards in a row that didn't exist a couple years ago. And so I think it's much more bit of an active focus of how do we modernize the brand a little bit and bring that into kind of all along with all of the new products and services and everything we have, but still leverage that great recognition that we've had. And, I think over time, the other thing is, nobody really has said, Weight Watchers is bad, right? There's not a negative connotation. It was maybe just a little bit of a dated connotation, right? And so I think that's where we decided, if we can modernize it a little bit, get out there all the new products and services and everything we have while leveraging that widespread name recognition, that's where we've been focused.
No, it's interesting you bring up that point, because I agree too. I think there are people that probably would look at Weight Watchers now and they might say like, oh, I didn't know that they have GLP-1 offerings. They have everything beyond the point system and the cookbooks and all this sort of stuff. Like you talk about having this real digital clinic focus, which I think is something that any organization in your space probably has to have, but you also have that 60 years that you can draw on that clearly Roe, Hims and Hers and others may not have, even though they have certainly very flashy and expensive advertising that we've covered on this podcast before. I wanted to pivot the conversation a little bit though and ask you, one of the things that really fascinates me is the coverage aspect of these drugs. I know you have Weight Watchers for Business, and I'm curious what you've heard from clients in terms of their needs and expectations around this, because that's been a big focus. Is businesses saying like, hey, I want to make sure that this is part of my employees' coverage plan. We want to be able to access these drugs and bring those benefits to workers. What have those conversations been like with some of the clients in terms of being able to have that happen for them?
Yeah, and I think that's also one of the differentiators for the company overall is we have strong businesses in both areas. So Weight Watchers from a direct-to-consumer angle, but then also Weight Watchers for Business. And so, we've been in the market over 30 years. That business has also evolved over time, but 300 plus clients, collaborations with large health plans and carriers, United Healthcare, et cetera, on down the line. And so another area where we're really excited about the growth prospects, of the coverage angle. And so, this is also an area where, it's, I would say, rapidly evolved over the past bit of time. I've spent a lot of my time on the, the commercial or the enterprise side. And even going back 2 or 3 years, I remember talking to employers and health plans. GLP-1s weren't top of mind. They definitely weren't household names, right? Mm-hmm. And I have one slide I remember. It was like, GLP-1s are going to be $100 billion market. And this was at the time, they maybe were like 5 or 10. And everybody looked at you sideways. Now it's 200, 250, $300 billion and like, household names, essentially, whether it's, GLP-1 in general or Ozempic, or on down the line. And so I think from a coverage lens, it's also super interesting of what's happening recently as well, of like new products hitting the market, more products coming soon, which has also radically changed the pricing of these medications as well, from $500 to $1,000, where now today the cheapest you can get an oral GLP-1 for $150, right? That's very different than it was a little bit of time ago. And so employers and plans, I think, are reassessing what is that, ROI and for those for maybe the 50% ish of employers that weren't covering GLP-1s historically, they're taking a little bit of a fresh look at that at a new price point and say, well, maybe that is a much nearer ROI that I can get by investing in that coverage than I've had before. And so that's been one element. And then the last one I'll mention just briefly. We've launched something we call RX Flex Fund, and there's kind of been a few of these direct to employer or kind of programs out there to leverage more of the cash pricing that is out there from some of the pharma companies. And I think that's a really interesting area as well that kind of goes beyond even than the existing pharmacy benefit, and looking at, are there new and interesting ways to cover these products, even beyond maybe some of the traditional ways that medications have been covered historically.
And I'm curious too, like, do you view that as the biggest outstanding obstacle to getting better accessibility and the price point you talk about too? Like, for the longest time, the conversation was, okay, these drugs can only be administered via the needle, and now we obviously have the oral one. You guys have the partnership with Novo Nordisk for their oral version of Wegovy. Like, is the issue still the coverage aspect, or where is it still like the tipping point where it's like, oh, we can finally get to smoother air? Because it does feel like there is still some turbulence there that obviously your business clients, and then obviously the employees have to navigate.
Yeah, I think it goes back to just how many people are qualified to take these medications, right? If you look at, BMI 30 plus or 27 with a comorbidity, that ranges 50 to 70% of a population. Very different than medications where it's, impacts 1% or 5% or whatever the population. So even with the price having dropped substantially, you look at the sheer number of people that could potentially use it as part of an employer or a health plan. I think that's where the math, is still kind of, in motion. And so, from a coverage perspective, the 50% of people or employers that we're covering historically, And that could be based upon they have longer duration of employees or they drive rich benefits for their, programs, whatever it might be. I think their economics are just going to continue to get better as prices decrease. For that other group that maybe historically said, my people don't stay around long enough and my plan, the churn's too high, just can't afford to cover them. Some of these new types of models are interesting, I think, from that lens, because you can say, I'm going to contribute $100 or $200 or, some part of the program, because I think the clinical and the outcomes benefits are pretty much non-disputable. You can't argue really about that at this point. It's more that number of people that might use the products times the cost, and does the math work? And I think some of these new options are exciting from that lens of expanding some of that coverage that maybe didn't exist before.
Yeah, you talk about it's kind of like a double-edged sword where it's like at the time it was, okay, this can treat obesity or type 2 diabetes. But now as the indications have expanded, you're expanding the amount of people that could be potentially on these drugs. And again, while it's great that we're now in pill form, there is the issue of like, okay, so how are we going to compensate for these drugs being out there, given that so many more people can use them? And I imagine that's something that comes up quite a bit in those conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And, from what we've seen early on, Novo had their products, the oral GLP-1 for weight loss first to market, Lilly likely having a product soon, in Q2. What we're seeing is it's really probably expanding the market even further. And I think that's what both of the pharmaceutical manufacturers were hoping. But, I think we're seeing a lot more new people to join our Med Plus program, leverage this oral medication versus maybe existing ones before saying, I'm going to switch from my injectable to the oral product. We actually, there's a little bit of that hesitance early, maybe first before you get one of the injectable products. But once you do, it's kind of not a big deal. And so, we haven't seen a lot of switching, which is, fairly in line with what we expected. But, to your point, has expanded the market to some extent. And so, just kind of raises that question further. However, we're super excited about just all the new products becoming available, some, additional injectables likely over the next 12 to 24 months, the oral options, especially as you think about, what does the journey look like year maybe 2+ after somebody loses 15, 20, 25% of their body weight, having some other options to help with that maintenance phase of what that looks like over time, I think will, be really, really important and impactful as well.
I want to circle back to the maintenance aspect a little bit in the conversation, but I want to go back to the point we were talking about with the advertising and marketing side, just because I know that's a big focus for our audience. And we've been actively following like all the letters coming out of the FDA, not only the untitled letters, but even more recently, there were the warning ones about certain telehealth firms that were advertising their GLP-1 products. And a lot of these are smaller players in the space. They're not the ones that we had mentioned earlier, but there's been a lot of scrutiny about how you market and advertise these offerings. And I'm curious if that has had any impact in terms of how Weight Watchers has gone to market, just being mindful of like, hey, there are a lot more eyeballs, whether in the court of public opinion or from regulators, in terms of how we talk about these things. Is that factored in at all?
For sure. Yeah. And so we try to be, very careful of the things we say of, one being very balanced. And so, we kind of are all comers, whether it's Novo, Lilly, as future manufacturers come out, we'll work with the best products at the best price point for our members to drive access. And so I think that's one is, making sure that you're kind of balanced in your approach that you're doing. Also making sure that, we're kind of driving, our own narrative, right? And so that can be informed by what others, in the market, are doing, but kind of, driving your own approach. And then the last piece I'll mention is, a lot of kind of the letters and warnings, et cetera, have been focused on the compounding pharmacies and players, just because some of the claims of this is the same or the efficacy is the same, et cetera, get stretched if you're doing that. And so, we're only using, branded FDA approved products with our Med Plus offering. Some others in the space are not. And so I think that's another, interesting area that will continue to, to develop over time as well. We kind of, took the position a while back ago now that, additional branded medication options are becoming available. The price will continue to decrease over time. We've got, a 60-year heritage and, longstanding of being the number one doctor recommended program. And so, science backed and clinically sound is super important to us. And so that, I think that's what we've tried to, rely on, and a lot of our messaging has come through. But anyway, overall, it's definitely something that we pay a lot of attention to, to make sure that we're trying to convey as much, useful information as possible for potential members out there. But also, do that with a mind of, kind of keeping those guidelines and regulations in mind.
Does that frustrate you at all? I wonder about it because you're working at obviously one of the companies. I think a lot of people, when they think about obesity and weight loss in America, they probably immediately think of Weight Watchers. I don't know if it's like one of those things where you're, out to eat with relatives or something, you're talking with friends and they're like, hey, I see this or I see that. And there is so much, I want to say misinformation, but misconceptions, I guess you can say, around obesity in America, and then the treatment options and everything. Like, does that frustrate you where you're like seeing other companies that maybe you can't control and you have no impact over, and you're like, hey, but we're talking about it. Weight Watchers is trying to drive its own narrative. It's trying to put that mission out there. Does that ever get frustrating to you where you're like, hey, like, can we just be all on the same page here about how we're trying to talk about these products? Or is that one of those things where you're like, I can't control what I can't control?
I think probably a little bit of the latter of focus on what you can control. And I think, we've tried to, tell the story of why, science backed, and just even going back to results, we've got some recent data out there, individuals engaging in our GLP-1 success program, regularly, lose 29% more weight, than individuals that do not. And so that just kind of reinforces the fact of what is that best in class programming, add on in value beyond just the medication. We're not, and I guess maybe pill mill's a little bit of a derogatory term, but we're not a company that the only thing we're going to do is like write you a script and then have fun. You're off on your own. And where others are. And so I think, our focus is, stay within the things that we can control. And from a macro perspective, I think the last couple of months, things are maybe moving in the right direction, I would say, with a little bit of curtailing of, some of the things that have been out there. And I think, especially as more medication options become available, more dosage forms become available, members have a lot more, choice at a competitive price point. A lot of that will likely take care of itself. And we're starting to see a little bit of that already as well.
Scott, I have a couple more questions for you. I mentioned earlier the maintenance aspect that I wanted to revisit, and you were kind of alluding to it there, where it's like, we're not just offering you the medication and then you go on your merry way. It's like, it's such a big thing of like this Weight Watchers 2.0 value of saying like, oh no, we want to be able to help you, because this is a maintenance aspect. This is a process. This isn't just you take it. It's also, we always hear in the ads, diet and exercise, living a healthy lifestyle. Like, talk about where that kind of positions Weight Watchers, because that is a differentiator, I think, from what maybe you see some others in the marketplace putting out there.
Yeah, for sure. And this is, an area that we're spending a lot of time on, because I think it's also an area that will continue to evolve a lot over the next year or two as well. But, our view is that if you want to have sustained results, linking the medication, which is a great tool, one of the best tools we've ever had in the toolbox, is important. But how do you pair that with best in class lifestyle support, behavior change, and whether that's nutrition or exercise, sleep, on down the line? So kind of all in there. And so, we've got both GLP-1 success on its own as part of our Med Plus, as I mentioned before. And so what we're really trying to do is, if you can do that right away as a member is engaging in the program early on and kind of drive some of those behavior changes, in a lot of ways, the GLP-1 can be that catalyst to help support some of those changes that maybe you couldn't make on your own historically. And then as you look into, I loosely just call it year two, but let's call it that maintenance phase, after an individual reaches their goal weight or, loses 20% or 25%, our view is increasingly, there's going to be a few different profiles of member. It's not going to all be the same, right? And so individuals that might have a cardiovascular condition or maybe significant weight to lose at that point still, even though they've had a great result, they might need standard dose or high dose ongoing GLP-1 therapy, and that might be the best thing for them, right? So it's not going to be everybody, stops the medication. But similarly, thinking everybody's going to continue using the medications forever is just also not realistic. And we, the data proves that out in members as well. And so in that group, we kind of think about it maybe in three buckets. One, you have individuals that get to that goal weight and they want to still maybe use the medication, but, is an oral option now available? Couldn't they use, a much lower dose or a micro dose, extend their dosing interval? And so that's an area that we're looking at a lot and seems, some interesting results in our members there. You have individuals that say, I'm done. I don't want a medication anymore. And that's where the behavior change, really comes in. Have you done that throughout the course of the program where you can maintain those results long-term, just not on a medication as well? And we've seen that in some percentage of our members too. And then the last group, will be individuals that, maybe get to their goal weight. They say, I want to come off medication. They regain some weight. And at some point down the line, whether it's 6 months or 12 months, et cetera, they probably start a GLP-1 again and use it for a period of time, right? And so again, but that support being kind of key there along with it is like, if you can extend that so they don't have to use that medication for a year instead of 3 months, that's a lot of value provided, right? So that's kind of how we're thinking about the maintenance or ongoing year two. And so with our, both our GLP-1 success programming and then even the Med+ virtual clinic, we can kind of help tailor what that experience looks like based upon that member's health profile and also just like what they're focused on from a preference perspective as well.
I appreciate you walking us through that. It's in line with what I've heard from a number of different folks when it comes to kind of redefining what the conversation is around GLP-1s and the lifespan there. So I really appreciate all of that. I have one more question for you. And again, it's been wonderful to have you on the show and talk about this kind of moment for the company and this ongoing evolution. I think it's very fascinating, at least from being on the outside and covering it as a reporter. I want to ask you, I'm going to present myself as a genie in a bottle, I guess you can say, but I'm only able to grant one specific wish for you, which is if you could wave a magic wand and have people understand one thing about Weight Watchers that maybe they don't understand, or maybe they have their misconceptions, or they come in with, oh, this is the organization I think it is. Like, I'm giving you that one wish. What do you want people to understand about this modern version of Weight Watchers?
I would say that it's we've evolved into a digital first kind of great tech platform that's complemented by our clinicians, by our in-person workshops and community. And we've probably kind of flipped it 180 degrees where maybe that was the initial piece before. And so, just the ability to engage digitally with kind of best in class content supported by the wraparound community and clinicians, et cetera, is something that maybe is not as well known, right? Being around so long and some of that legacy. And so I think, take a fresh look at where we are today. That would be one. If we could change that conception, I think it would be positive. And, we're kind of on the journey of doing that today.
No, and I appreciate you taking a pit stop here on that journey to be able to inform our audience of where things stand, the thinking behind a lot of these actions. So I really appreciate the time, Scott, and I hope we can reconnect down the line to see how you guys are progressing on that. It's been an interesting journey, certainly over the past couple of years.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Jack, and enjoyed the conversation.
Steve Levine, Chief Patient Officer at Compass Pathways.
Steve, really appreciate it. I'm glad that we get to do this. And for those who aren't here in the room, in the back of an empty restaurant. So what better place to have a conversation? Let's start off just with what brings you to South by Southwest. Have you ever been before?
First time at South by Southwest, and really excited to be on a panel speaking about psychedelics, the paradigm-changing future of mental health.
It's also my first time at South by Southwest. We can get to that later in the interview, but talk to me a little bit, one, about the panel, and then I have a bunch of questions about the psychedelic space, because I feel like it's an area that gets a lot of interest from our readership and the broader pharma community, but a lot of misconceptions, stigma, all that sort of stuff. But what is the panel specifically focused on?
At Compass Pathways, we are developing COMP360, which is a synthetic formulation of psilocybin, which is a psychedelic substance. And we're developing it for people living with treatment-resistant depression, which is a difficult to treat depression, people who have not benefited from traditional approaches to treating their condition. as well as post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. In total, this represents millions of people who are not well served with the currently available options. We're developing this through the FDA pathway to be a prescription medicine to be delivered by licensed healthcare providers in a supervised medical setting. We are in the late stages of this. We are looking forward to potentially submitting our application to FDA later this year. But merely having an FDA-approved product doesn't guarantee that it gets to the people who are waiting. This panel will focus on how do you create access to FDA-approved psychedelics with an eye towards broad and equitable access.
And what have been some of the biggest obstacles, I think, just in my own experience, hearing people talk about psychedelics, they come in with this idea of like hippies at Woodstock and a completely different, more recreational focus than the medicinal purposes you're talking about. Is that something that you faced with regulators, or like what are those obstacles to even just getting that approval before you then start talking about commercialization?
Less so with regulators, but certainly in the general population, there's the counterculture associations of the 60s and 70s. There is familiarity with the use of psychedelics in more recreational contexts or even ceremonial and traditional contexts. We are specifically developing this through the FDA pathway with the hallmarks of a modern medicine, conducting large clinical trials. So far, we've had over 1,000 participants in our study, developing this in the same way as you would develop any medicine. And so part of our job is to help people understand the difference between use in those other contexts and how psychedelics as a class, and COMP360 specifically, may represent new options that may, in fact, be an entirely new paradigm of care, in the sense that most antidepressants and other psychiatric treatments are oral medications taken by mouth at home on a daily basis. What we are developing and what we've seen so far in our trials is that these may be infrequent episodic treatments. In fact, with recent data we released of our 2 phase 3 trials, those who benefited saw an almost immediate response. It was measured in the first day after a single administration. And for those who responded with just 1 or 2 treatments, that was durable out to at least 6 months. And in our trials, that was delivered in a supervised setting.
I'm curious too, like you brought up the point about obviously having to navigate the regulatory environment. What has been the reception when you're talking with other folks in the biotech and pharma space? Because obviously they have a very vested interest in treating depression, and we talk about medically resistant depression and PTSD. But what has that been like from your end?
Whether it's pharma companies, other biotech companies in the space, or the FDA themselves, they've really been, in some ways, I think, forced to pay attention. Because over the past few years, we have seen study after study have tremendous results in psychedelic compounds across a range of conditions. Whereas with more traditional approaches, traditional mechanisms of approaching depression, anxiety, PTSD, those studies have failed. So FDA recognizes the potential of this class. They've really been leaning in as far as being supportive of this research. And similarly, pharma, big pharma included, have started to pay more attention. In fact, we've seen a couple of acquisitions of psychedelic companies by big pharma relatively recently because they recognize the potential here.
I'm curious too, like I remember, I've been doing this job since April of 22, and so that was the early part of the Biden administration, and there was, and I don't know if it was the influence of certain advisors that were in there, certainly a more lax and flexible approach to the psychedelic space. And then obviously when RFK Jr. got announced as HHS secretary, it was like, oh yeah, like there's going to be this whole, I was reading a piece, I think it was in Axios or something a week or so ago, where there was kind of like, it hasn't really lived up to the full potential, I guess, of what the community was looking for. I'm curious what you make in terms of the federal approach and whether the Kennedy-led HHS has been as receptive as you've been looking for, if there's still room for improvement. What does that look like on your end?
It's great to hear supportive statements from the administration, from the secretary, from leadership at FDA, and so on. Ultimately, the people that we interact with on a regular basis are within the psychiatry division at FDA. That's a group of people that's remained consistent over the past few years. The people we talked to a few years ago are still there today. We've had breakthrough therapy designation since 2018, and that allows us to have relatively frequent and robust dialogue with the FDA. And we're really happy with their level of responsiveness and their supportiveness. And So that's really where we're focused, is on that relationship.
I've really appreciated the time. We're getting the wrap-up signal, so I'm just going to ask you one more question, which is just if there's anything you want our audience to know about psychedelics that maybe they don't fully understand. If you could wave a magic wand, what would that be?
It's important to recognize that these are still investigational compounds right now. We don't have FDA-approved psychedelics yet, but we are potentially on the cusp of that. And that is a really exciting time. Now, we don't want to cut corners. We think it's really important that the same standards of evidence apply to psychedelics as anything else. So we will continue to complete our large and rigorously designed clinical trials. But there is hope on the horizon, first for people living with treatment-resistant depression, that there may be a new option soon, and one that has really redefined what rapid response can look like, and also the durability of a treatment effect, but also safety. So far, we've shown a safety profile that is generally safe and well tolerated. And so we are really excited to continue on this path and potentially bring a new option to the people who are waiting and so underserved today.
Narissa Gomes. I am the Vice President of the Cardiovascular Business Unit at Amgen.
And what brings you, Narissa, to South by Southwest?
Well, we're here to do a panel with Barry Sanders and another patient to talk about how we can make a bigger impact on cardiovascular health in the United States.
Talk to me a little bit about involving Barry, because obviously we cover in this space a lot of different celebrities, athletes, all that sort of stuff who are involved with different pharma and health brands. But Barry obviously has a very personal connection. Talk about how that involves what Amgen's doing.
Sure. Maybe I'll go back a little bit and just talk about why we started to do this. So, not new news. We know cardiovascular risk is a pretty serious condition in the United States. Every 40 seconds, someone has a heart attack or stroke. And if you look at the number of cardiovascular events in the United States, it's been growing steadily over the past few years. Yet, despite medications that can help treat that, we aren't seeing cardiovascular events reduce. And bad cholesterol, LDL-C, is one of those modifiable risk factors that sadly is ignored. So at Amgen, we started to look at why. What can we do to make a difference, to really get people energized about talking about cholesterol and better cardiovascular health? And we knew we had to do something different. And so that's where really working with Barry Sanders came to fruition, because Barry, as you mentioned, has an authentic story. He's someone that is widely recognized. He's an athlete. He's obviously been doing all the right things, yet he had a cardiovascular event. And so that provided us the opportunity to talk with someone that can connect with the big audience. People recognize him. They know his story. They know he has probably a platform that can help educate in places where we aren't able to get the voice out.
And can you talk a little bit about that too? Because not only is it obviously authentic, and you're talking about a pro football Hall of Famer, arguably one of the best running backs in the history of the game, but also we cover a bunch of different campaigns and stuff, and it's tough generally for men to talk about their health conditions and be, let alone public with it, just being able to talk to their families and stuff with it. That's very very powerful in its own right, let alone when it's somebody that has a platform, has this decades-long connection with an audience that you're trying to tap into. I imagine it's very meaningful for you as a brand to be able to leverage that for a cause like cardiovascular awareness.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we know cardiovascular events, especially when it comes to heart attacks, skew more towards men, but also it also skews towards women as well. We know women tend to have more strokes. Having someone with Barry's, following, he doesn't just have men who follow him. He also has a lot of female and women followers who admire his sport and what he brings. And I think that's the power of his story. He's being able to connect with perhaps the male audience that's, doesn't want to talk about medications and what they need to do to avoid something as severe as a heart attack or stroke, but also reaching female audiences that may not be aware that they need to be more informed about their cardiovascular risk. And I think if you looked at the way we did the Making of a Heart Attack campaign, which is where Barry was part of it, it wasn't just about him sharing his story. It was him coming together with real people that have similar experiences where the heart attacks came out of nowhere or the strokes came out of nowhere, and what they did, just like Barry did, to really understand why it happened. And maybe through this platform, we can get other people to realize that it doesn't have to happen to them, and what can they do to be better informed and better treated prior to having a heart attack or stroke.
Can you talk a little bit about what went into that process? Because my editor-in-chief, Jameson, came back last year from Cannes, and he was like, oh yeah, like Amgen's got their activation here with Barry Sanders. So this has been almost a year in the works now by the time we're having this conversation. But I know it's not enough to just say, like, we got our celebrity, we got our well-known person, that's the core of the campaign, we wipe our hands and we're done with it. Like, this has been an ongoing effort. So talk about what all those different components and how you evaluate, like, how effective this is, or like, we want to go this way instead of that way. I think that's interesting probably for our audience to hear.
Yeah, so actually our journey started before last year. We started this journey about 4 years ago where we said we need to do something different. And what that started first with was Amgen making almost a rallying cry and ambition to say we want to have the number of cardiovascular events in the United States by 2030. But Amgen cannot do that alone. We need to get the healthcare ecosystem around us. And so partnering with people like the Heart Association, American Heart Association, American College of Cardiology, Black Heart Association, lots of groups that are actually very passionate about this. That's where our journey started. So that's one aspect, partnering with the healthcare ecosystem. The other is how do we get the message across? And that was where, and kudos to some of my colleagues, on the corporate affairs side, we had to take a different approach. Everyone's seen the pharma ads. We get on, we put out our PSAs or disease state education, but we're like, we need to do something different. And so this idea of a documentary, a docu-series, if you will, where you can actually get to a long form format where you can explain what's happening, what does a heart attack look like? How does it happen? What are the consequences of it? Was really the kernel of where this idea started. And then it was, okay, who are the right voices to be able to tell that story? And we were very lucky to be able to have Barry be willing to join that along with 4 other very passionate individuals. And Dr. Collins, who's part of the documentary as well, who explained what your cardiovascular risk is and how to think about bad cholesterol and what your levels should be. And we saw tremendous response from the documentary launch. We've seen almost a 55% increase in our testing that we do ourselves, more awareness on what LDL is, as well as more visits to our website, attackheartdisease.com, I'm sorry. And that's a good place to learn more about it. But that's a documentary. It's one aspect of the campaign. What you've seen is a bunch of, ongoing socializations through various news networks. You referenced Cannes. We're here at South by Southwest, again, to get the word out and continue to pound the pavement. We know cardiac health is having a moment. There's a lot of buzz around what's going on with obesity and other things, but there's an important risk factor, which is bad cholesterol, and we want to get the word out and make sure that's also recognized, and that's why we continue to do what we're doing here.
If we can zoom out a little bit, I come at it from a unique perspective. I grew up with a heart condition, and obviously, we're recording this on St. Patrick's Day, come from a large Irish family. That kind of is our thing, is having heart issues. But a lot of people don't know that. Like, a lot of people, I assume, understand, like, oh yeah, like what a stroke is, or what a heart attack, or all these other sorts of things. But what have you come across in terms of doing this campaign work where you're like, oh yeah, like this is a common misconception, or I wish people knew more about this when it comes to cardiovascular health? Is there anything that comes to mind that way?
Yeah, cardiovascular health or cardiovascular disease is multifactorial. We know that there are various risk factors that lead to having a heart attack or stroke, things like diabetes, hypertension, smoking, etc., all components of what leads to a heart attack or stroke. One of the most modifiable risk factors, which a lot of people don't know, we all know what cholesterol is, but we don't really understand it because it's hidden, you don't see it, and so people don't think about cholesterol as really having a very tangible link to a heart attack or stroke. But data has shown over and over again that if you look at the most modifiable event risk to address your events, it's actually your bad cholesterol. So LDL-C, which is bad cholesterol, if you can get that down to safe levels, that will indeed help reduce the risk of heart attack or stroke significantly, sometimes even more so than some of the other risk factors. So that's one. People don't know the risk of what it means to get their LDL-C under control. That's one misconception. The second is, even if they know they need to get their cholesterol under control, how to get their cholesterol under control. There is also a belief that you can get diet and exercise, and that will get your cholesterol levels to the safe zone. Well, that's true to a certain percentage, about 20% of the risk can be addressed through a diet and exercise. But for most of us, and you mentioned your family history, I have tremendous family history myself. My LDL levels are very high and could not be controlled with diet and exercise, so I have to resort to medication. So that's the second misconception. The third is how it presents. People think of it as being more male, as we talked about earlier, but women, especially women, who've had childbearing age, that have complications at birth, are more at risk of an event. Women who are in menopause are more at risk of an event. So those are some of the misconceptions around LDL-C or bad cholesterol and the linkage it can have to having a heart attack or stroke. I always like to think about it as people care more about the plaque in their teeth, but not necessarily their plaque in their inside. And that's one of those things we're trying to work on. Is cholesterol can lead to plaque buildup, which leads to bad consequences.
All I'm gathering from this is all plaque, all bad.
Exactly.
Plaque, it's in your teeth and your arteries, it's all bad. I want to ask a question too. We did our first print edition of the magazine earlier this year, and it was all about pharma and health brands aligning with sports figures, and whether that's leagues, athletes, franchises. That is having a moment. We're in this year where it's like we've had the Super Bowl, Winter Olympics. We're recording this just on the cusp of March Madness. The World Cup's coming up. Like, sports have never been hotter. Certainly when it's on TV, it's the number one programming, whether it's football or any other sorts of sports. But it's been interesting, again, kind of at that point where it's like, it's not just to be able to say like, hey, we got our sports person and we're good to go. Working with somebody like Barry Sanders, I know Amgen has other sports-related activations, but like, is there any sort of advice you pass along to your peers who are like, hey, we'd love to be able to like leverage our messaging with sports in some sort of capacity? Like, is there any sort of advice you pass along to them of like, here's how you start, or maybe here's some best practices to follow?
I think it starts first with finding the right sports or athlete representative who has the authentic story. I think the reason that Barry's story really works is because he's very authentic. He experienced this horrific event and he started to be more curious about why, and then want to talk about it. So I think that's number one. Two, I think finding a way to tell the story that's not traditional. We do see a lot of sports and athletes getting up and doing, pharma ads and things like that. I think this approach is novel. We haven't taken, we had the approach of having Barry talk with other people who've had heart attacks or strokes, so you can connect between the sports but also the individual that maybe isn't as blessed as Barry is. So I think that would be the second. And the third is we just need to keep doing more of this. So the more people that can come out and speak about, their own individual risk, no matter how much, they have to the best healthcare, the best ability to diet or exercise, real risk is still there. So having the ability to find more people in sports, who are willing to talk about it, I think would be really good. But yeah, it's a tremendous platform for us, and I think we'd love to see more of our pharma partners join us in this call to action.
And what does the go forward look like? Again, you talk about this being years in the works before you get Barry in here. It's about a year since it launched with him as the focus. What are the next weeks, months? Are there other iterations we can expect from this? Or what does that look like in the future?
Yeah, I think it's something we continue to learn and evolve on. I mean, I think what we are going to continue to do is to see, both using voices like Barry, but also others. I think Family Heart, which is another very important advocacy partner in this space, is also, featured Matt Hasselbeck, who's another very important.
Not a Pro Football Hall of Famer, I will say. Just for any sports fans in the audience, I just want to make that distinction. Yes, another.
Yes, and then the NFL Players Association is also, joined on to do more around cholesterol and better cardiovascular health. So there's more of these activations, and we're always continuing to see what's out there to make sure we can find the right place to get the message out, but more importantly, to get people to get up and go get their LDL tested and talk to their doctor to know their risk.
It's been wonderful having this conversation. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you a question about South by Southwest. This is my first time at South by Southwest. I don't know if it's
mine too.
Yours as well.
Yes.
What is the experience been like for you being here? I think I had an image in my head of what it was like, and some of it is matched with it, some of it's been a little different. What has it been like for you being here?
I actually just landed, so I still have to go see, but I'm very excited about it. But I've never been, so I've zero expectations. I've just heard a lot of really good things about it.
Well, by the time our listeners listen to this, they can reach out and be like, Marissa, this is what I want to know.
Exactly.
Really appreciate the time and all the work that you're doing, especially, again, somebody that's lived with a heart condition for so long. It comes from a family that any awareness, being able to raise that is so crucial. I give you and Amgen all the props in the world for being able to do that, and Barry as well for being able to go out there and publicly talk about it. That's not easy to do.
Go get your LDL tested if you haven't already.
Every year I do. I promise. My cardiologist, my PCP, I'm all good to go.
And then make sure your listeners know they can go to attackheartdisease.com and get access to free LDL testing.
Excellent. I really appreciate the time. Thank you again.
Thank you.
I'm Kevin Shah. I am Executive Director of Healthcare Medical and Corporate Strategy at MMC, which is part of Omnicom Public Relations.
Wonderful to have you on. Let's just start with the fact you live in Austin, so I'm down here. Everyone's coming into town, but this is a normal day for you. What is it like being South by comes to town?
Yeah, it's funny because when South by comes to town, anyone that lives in Austin is like, let me get out of Austin proper because everyone's coming in. It's nice to see because a lot of people are coming in, they're experiencing Austin. What's different about this year is the convention center is demolished. So
I've noticed.
Right? So, but now we're starting to see all these like new hotels, these new spots that have popped up, and like people, their events, they're going to. So it's actually, you're seeing like, I moved here in 2019. What's happened in 6 years? Like all the growth. Also what's coming out of the woodwork, we're moving more to the front. A lot of the healthcare and the tech that's coming through, the small startups that honestly, they didn't exist 2-3 years ago, especially in Austin.
We're getting into all the healthcare stuff because the data we recorded here is the start of the health track formally, so it's all very exciting. But you talk about some of those local spots and all that sort of stuff, like, and I'm not telling you to give up your secrets or anything, but for people, for the next time that they come to South by or they come to Austin, what are the places that they have to go to, whether for music, brisket, whatever it may be?
I mean, standards are always going to be Franklin's, Terry Black's for the barbecue. You got some really cool spots. There's a hospitality group called Emma and Rye. They have a couple of restaurants in town, so definitely check them out. Hotels, the hotel lobbies, the hotel ambiance is always fantastic. Actually, I'll plug them. I have no affiliation with them at all. Hotel Zaza.
Okay.
Fantastic hotel, awesome vibe. They have a pool top. A lot of it is just word of mouth. You go into like some of the coffee shops, some of the taco places. Let me also plug, if you find a small little taco stand that's out of the way, definitely stop by. Definitely ask them, what should I be doing? They know what is going on. That's where I get my recos from.
Before I came down here, I was talking to somebody from another agency that I won't mention, but they had said, like, it's a non-negotiable when you're down here. So it's good to know that is still prescient advice. Talking South by stuff, obviously with people coming into town, and we joke about people that get out of town, like, this has to be an interesting point for you because there is some healthcare and brands that we're trying to excel. What are you most looking at in terms of this year's panel and the different tracks and stuff? So what's calling you out?
So this year, a couple different things. Like there's a whole innovation track this year. So what is number one, just like what does innovation mean in healthcare and in tech, and like where do those two meet? So I'm really looking forward to the panel. So there's gonna be a couple panels today that I'm gonna attend, a couple panels tomorrow. Just what's the definition? Obviously, AI is everywhere. But more importantly, how are they using it? How are they using it in healthcare? And then what are we looking forward to? Personally, like what I would like companies, panelists to start answering are the ethical implications of AI around especially healthcare data, especially around patient data. You can have a model, you can train an LLM, but should we be doing it? And if so, how to do that in an ethical way, not just a compliant way, but asking the question, should we be doing it? Not, can we do it?
It's interesting you bring that up. I went to a panel earlier with some journalists from Bloomberg, and they were talking about that. They're like, healthcare is actually one of the industries that's slated to benefit from AI because it can take that administrative burden that doctors face and really allow HCPs to do the things that they want to do from a perspective. And bring up that ethical point is so crucial because you just don't feel that. People are talking about like, oh, here's how we can increase productivity and make it more frictionless for patients, but what happens in terms of security, what happens in terms of patients being, afforded that autonomy to make decisions and make some choices. It's something that doesn't get a lot of play, so I'm glad you bring it up.
Yeah, and also thinking about so there's one thing about using the LLMs, using AI, using it for the patients. Talking about the other audience, you're talking about your healthcare providers, you're talking about your hospitals. They're not really trained, or they don't know how to use AI in that manner. They don't know the language. They don't know what's going out there. So you have all this innovation, which is fantastic. But now, how do you materialize that? How do you bring that to the end users so that they can use it? And that's right. We're kind of in this intersection right now. We've got to figure it out. We'll get there, but that's what we're talking about that. So there's one thing that I'm really interested in. And there's another panel tomorrow that caught my eye. Again, no affiliation, the rise of the TikTok doc. Mm-hmm. Where are we right now? What have we learned, and what is it moving forward? There's are we starting to see a little bit of a backlash? No, I don't want to get my information from the TikTok doc now. Or are we really going to see the next wave? Okay, what does the next generation of the TikTok doc phenomenon look like?
And where do you fall on that split? Or is it kind of something that you're going in hey, I'm open to either side of it?
Number one, I love it. I love using all these platforms. Number one, for generating questions and curiosity. Just want to be mindful. Are we asking the right questions, and are we making sure we have a full picture view? We're not just spewing, we're not just saying one way, this is how it needs to be, but education, and then following that awareness. I love it. I just want to make sure that it's done in the right way, and also coming back to the ethical way, okay? Who are the people talking about it? It's okay if they're in one specialty or another, or even if they're not a practicing clinician. At the end of the day, just raise the awareness, get information out there so everyone can benefit.
Definitely. I want to ask you a question too. This is more brand side stuff, but I've been walking around. You see, Coke has their stuff splashed everywhere. Every concert venue I go to, I went by yesterday on your street. Vivian's got their electric, vehicles going up and down mountains of dirt. There's so many brands, there's so many kinds of different activations. I think it's a little difficult for health brands because they don't have that same one-to-one interaction with consumers. Curious from your perspective, how, at least when you're talking to clients or looking at the situation, how they can do better or make those kind of meaningful impacts with the patient population they're trying to target.
Yeah, actually, it's a really good point. If you're a pharma company, if you're a pharma brand, should you come here? Should you be investing your dollars? Should you be doing a sponsorship or an activation? So the way that we're going about it is, okay, well, what's the end goal? If you're coming here to talk product, there are going to be smaller things that you can do, very focused, very niche to the audience. If you want to go bigger, you want to go large scale, tie it into what's happening in the trend, innovation, AI, patient centricity. That's the first thing. The second thing is, who are you bringing to talk? So 2 days ago, was on a panel listening to Mark Cuban talk about all things AI, all things healthcare. What is someone that would be great just to talk about, just where is he seeing the space? Also, again, want to bring that curiosity and being authentic. Try and be very wary of not trying to push a single message, but just have a free-for-all conversation. And actually, for the healthcare brands and for the pharma companies, it's actually almost better to invite people that are not in the space. Get their perspective. What are they seeing and what are they learning?
That was actually something, the first day I was here, Gilead had one with Sierra because they have their 1-2 prep commercial they put out there. And hearing her talk about it, the question they asked her, they're like, did you ever think that your song would be featured in a pharma ad? She was like, of course not. Got a big rise out of the crowd and stuff. But I'd never seen so many people engage, one, with the concept of taking pop culture and putting it in a pharma ad. But then it was a bigger conversation about HIV prevention, about color and long-standing institutional problems in healthcare. And it was wow, that doesn't happen. These people aren't that invested in it. Have a superstar in the room like that. So I think your point's well taken. It's it doesn't have to be somebody that's so entrenched in healthcare. You can still have those broader conversations.
Yeah, and there's a stat, and don't hold me to the exact number, right? Of what you say, 70% of it is how you say it. It's only 30% is actually what you say. So song's a great medium to get a message out. Film, advertising, communication, that is the crux. We need that because you could say something, but we've all seen it, right? If you're just putting up something that's a white page with just lines of copy, no one's sitting there. You add a celebrity component, you add a spokesperson, you add music, you add an interesting activation. That's a better way to get a message, an important message across. I love it. It's catchy. Everyone knows that song, and it's like, okay, at the end of the day, okay, it's a way of educating the public that otherwise wouldn't get educated.
And it's a challenge here too, because it's like, yeah, you may want to go to a healthcare event, well, yeah, I'm going to learn about X, Y, or Z health topic, but when you're faced with this film premiere, this concert, or this giveaway, it's a tough sell. I admittedly be like, I'm spending this money over this course of these days, and I'm going to sit there and not have like that entertainment stuff. That has to be involved in something.
I mean, there's so much noise, right? And even for this year, there's no sports track. So you even take out the sports track, there's still a ton of noise. You're competing against a lot. So I like thinking about healthcare, thinking about innovation, like how are we going to cut through the noise? Get out there, but ask tough questions. Like have a panel that is going to challenge, that is going to ask the tough questions, and dare I say, like go off script, like tell a personal story, tell a personal anecdote, but also challenge. Honestly, at the end of the day, like when I'm going to a panel, I want to hear the panelists answer tough questions. I want to ask them tough questions. I want to see what they say, because that's at the end of the day. That's what makes me want to actually attend a panel, especially if we're talking about healthcare.
Definitely. You had talked about that you're going to a bunch of different panels as the health track gets underway and stuff. How else do you maximize your time at South by Southwest? And then some of the best advice I got when I came down here is, hey, like have some, table stakes on your calendar, but also just wander around the different houses, see what you can see. Like, is that how you take the approach? Is it putting together different, happy hours, meetings and stuff? Like, how do you make the most of everybody being in town?
It's the latter. It's really, when I get here, the first day, so overwhelming. So I literally I make the rounds. I walk around and say, what's capturing my eye and why? And just take a mental note. Okay, well they did this interesting. Oh, this is very cool how they did it. There's a huge line. Why is that? So it starts piquing the curiosity. That's first and foremost. And the second is just talking to people. Hey, what are you going to? What did you see? What's really interesting? The third thing is though, where's the food? I smell the smoke on the barbecue pit. I'm like, okay, well, let me go find there. So kind of a mix of the two. But again, I think the first thing, I want to get my bearings down and I want to see, okay, what's catching my eye and what are they doing that's making me want to, stop and take notice.
I got to tell you, I just came back from the PR Week Awards in New York on Thursday, and I got to fit into my wedding tuxedo because that was my barometer for fitness. I was like, oh, I'm so proud. Like, it's a little too tight the last time. And then I come down here, and it's like everything is deep fried and brisket. I don't know how you guys do it. I really tell.
Jack, today's too cold, but right across the street is Ladybird Lake.
I'm aware.
Okay.
Yeah,
so yes. There's the balance. Like either you wake up 6-7 in the morning, take a couple laps around Ladybird Lake, and you're set for the rest of the day.
When it's 95 degrees outside, not doing that. I know it was relatively cold yesterday morning. I'll give you that. It's been great to be able to have this touch base. I do want to ask you just one more question about MMC, just because we're going into ABC 100 season. Obviously, there's been a lot of change. Just give us a status update in terms of where MMC stands right now and what people can look forward to in terms of what you're doing in the sense.
Yeah, fair. MMC, kind of what we talk about is the intersection of healthcare, beauty, and wellness. Like, what is that middle ground? Where is that Venn diagram overlap, and how are we going to communicate? If we can figure that out, we've done our job.
That's good to know. Anything else that you want people to keep in mind, either from South by Southwest or anything you're looking at in the industry?
No, really. I'm very curious to see where the trends are for this year. We're looking at things about how cardiometabolic health and how weight loss, Alzheimer's disease, oncology, how all those things come together. So as we move forward, just how all these things fit, how the landscape evolves. And I'm interested to see what innovation in healthcare looks like next year at this time.
We'll be able to meet back in this same hotel lobby and have that conversation. Really appreciate the time. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate it.